I would actually argue that Europe currently leads.
Hmm.
Mika is the clearest and most far reaching regulation that isn't like, kill it, please. And we're back once again.
Finally, new year.
We haven't even managed to publish the previous episode, but
But I edited it at the end.
yeah, yeah. We're on a specific cadence. I'm not sure how you would describe that cadence, but it's not what you might call consistent.
Well, the thing is, there was this whole thing that I remember reading back when I was doing game development that when there are consistent, when the rewards are consistently spaced, the people don't react as well as if the rewards are semi-randomly spaced. So maybe that's what we're going for. Semi-random spaces, spacing to keep people waiting.
Yeah, keep people waiting and also avoid actually I think this is an altruistic reason. So we don't want to create kind of a dopamine hit loop and thus we make it all very random and so people, get a little delight when the Spelunking podcast comes out, but you never know when that's going to be.
We should get the effective altruist to sponsor us then, man.
Do they have any money?
Well, I imagine I understand that if the eggs give them a shit, so as long as that doesn't get clawed back.
Oh no, no, no. I think so. I don't know anything about it on a technical legal level, but my understanding was that what the effective altruistic movement has been positioning as like money at the disposal of the effective altruistic movement has in fact not been like their money, like not on their bank account. It's just that the FTX future fund and whatever other vehicles they were using were sort of considered to be EA.
Ah,
And
okay,
those are gone.
okay.
Yeah.
Um,
So maybe, I mean, Dustin Moskovitz still has some money, I imagine.
quite a bit, not just some.
Yeah, but his Facebook stock has taken a beating. Anyway, what should we talk about today?
Where are you gonna start?
What was it? The Bukele bucks?
Oh God,
Should we
fuck.
should
Yeah,
we
let's
talk
let's get
about
that shit out of the way.
should we talk about how cringy some Bitcoiners are?
Some man,
I mean, I know people who still support Bitcoin, but they just usually aren't like the reasonable ones are just not very loud. And so I don't think it's like I'm not I don't criticize the majority of Bitcoin holders. I only criticize the loud ones who call out everything else
that's
as
yeah,
scams
but
and then they
that's the thing. I
release
wouldn't call
Bukele
that
bucks.
I wouldn't call that a Bitcoiner. It is somebody who holds Bitcoin, right? In the same way that if you hold some Apple stock, you're not like an Apple nut, right? It's just part of your portfolio. But the people who identify as Bitcoiners are the ones that don't touch anything else, like the
Which is
cultists.
which is madness. Like
Yeah.
just complete madness.
So for
It's
me,
worked out for
that's what
them so far
describes
though.
that for me is what describes a Bitcoiner. Basically, somebody who purely invests on Bitcoin. And all the reasonable ones that were Bitcoiners seem to have at the very least warmed up to Ethereum in the past few years. So I would consider them as Bitcoin OGs. Maybe there are people the majority of the wealth is in Bitcoin, but they're not built the Bitcoin cultist that's going to get on stage and scream, we're not leaving behind what the fuck was his name.
Yeah, it's all quite strange.
Yeah, but
It's also
in case
very
any,
strange that Bitcoiners were calling out Ethereum as somehow the problem relating to the FTX collapse, which was just like, what?
maybe I missed that
Like,
one.
yeah, it was happening a lot on Twitter at some point. It's like, come on, like, was MT Gox trading Ethereum? No, like,
I completely missed that one. I mean,
yeah, there were a lot of
I,
voices.
I would imagine if they like, there were some people who were saying like, "Oh, Solana is the problem because FTX was selling everything to buy Sol." Which, okay, I can. Let's say that we don't necessarily have all the evidence that happened. Let's say that that's an argument to be made, but yeah, that's really weird.
Yeah, one thing. Well, actually, someone released Bukele bucks, which are shitcoins on what network?
I Are they
Because
even
it's not on Bitcoin.
shitcoins? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they're actually shitcoins. It just seems to be like a collect. At the very least, the thing that is on Bitcoin Magazine's store, where like this collectible acrylic frame collectible things to put on your wall.
Really?
Yeah, I'm not even sure if there's like an on-chain token attached to it somewhere.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Sure.
this is basically Bukele memorabilia.
Okay. I mean, so back in the day, before when it was still just Bitcoin, there were a lot of people selling like physical Bitcoins or like
Yeah.
physical representations of Bitcoin. And I always thought that was just the strangest thing. It was like isn't like can you unironically have one of those and be like, look at all the virtues and benefits of Bitcoin. Like I can just hand over this physical coin to you and you now have that Bitcoin unless I've tampered with the seal.
Yeah, look, that okay. So first of all, I always thought that was weird. I still think it's weird because I think some people still use it, but I could, on a twisted way, see that because if I recall correctly, that came out at around the same time that the Bitcoin community started doubting like the digital gold thing. So to me, it seemed to be very aimed at the same people who collect gold coins and shit. Basically, that's what I thought this was aimed at. No, not necessarily actually meant to be a practical medium of storage or exchange. It was just the marketing thing.
But I mean, I heard like a pitch for paper wallets last week, and
But
I don't even know how to react to that. It's like, what? Why would you use paper wallets? What possible reason could you have?
okay, let's back up a bit. Do you mean somebody was arguing for paper wallets, or somebody
Yeah.
was pitching you a startup around paper
No,
wallets?
no, no, not pitching a startup, but like espousing the virtues of paper wallets.
Okay.
Sure. If
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
how you want to go, that thinking in terms of, mainstream adoption, that doesn't seem like it's going to be the way, but all right.
yeah, this seems almost like a going back to like fetishizing the old artisanal methods almost, right? Mm,
Yeah,
okay.
and I mean, sure, but I think somehow if you're gonna go like artisan, or something like you need to do it in the digital realm now for it to not feel stupid. Like there's a lot of cool NFT stuff sort of in that space that's trying to like, I don't know, like have some strange ownership model. Like what's that NFT that there's like only one NFT and then it keeps increasing in price when it's sold or something like that. Like things like that, they have like an elegance to them. But if you're bringing stuff back into the real world, it just feels a little bit like it's a little bit like if you were still driving around in a horse and carriage, it's like okay, sure, but gimmick.
I mean, people do that, right? It's very much of a first world thing, but you see for unicycles and on this like penny farting bikes going around. Like, okay, sure, knock yourself
Yeah.
out. So basically, that's the equivalent of the penny farting bike and top hat of crypto.
Mm. Very good. So if anybody wants Bukele memorabilia, I guess it's available somewhere.
Indeed, Bitcoin
I
Magazine
would certainly
apparently.
not. Yeah, very weird. Isn't Bitcoin
Eh,
Magazine where Vitalik used to work?
I don't
I think so.
know.
I
Maybe.
think so. Anyway, let's move on to the future, where where things are not physical memorabilia necessarily. Have you had a chance to look at Firedancer, by the way?
I know of it. I haven't done like a deep dive or anything. I
Yeah.
know that it is by and large implemented in C with some stuff in assembly. It's basically the only other official client implementation that we actually have out there. That's pretty much as I can tell you.
Yeah. I mean, that's correct. So it's an implementation of a Solana node made by Jump Trading in C++, I think. And what is interesting about it is that it's been, I think, benchmarked in a testnet setting to be capable of around 600,000 transactions per second. And so if we discount that, so in a purely scientific setting, the theoretical maximum is about 1.2 million.
Oh,
Testnet setting around 600,000. I would imagine if you discount that a little bit to go to sort of think of mainnet kind of levels, you're still talking, hundreds of thousands. If I was to take a random guess, like 3 or 400,000. Of course, what's interesting about it is that the Solana network is not going to sort of get those capabilities per se unless everybody switches to running Firedancer. And so they would basically need to boot all the existing nodes out of the network. But theoretically, the Solana protocol as implemented in Firedancer should be able to do transaction throughput, which is like an order of magnitude from anything else.
mm. So you're discounting those numbers less than I would. Actually, if I recall correctly, the testnet in Solana was benchmarked, like the default implementation was benchmarked at around 50K. And in practice, it handles 5 to 7K. So I would assume 10%. Still, assuming that it jumps from 5 to 30,000, then that's still a significant jump. While I agree that the whole network would need to switch for this to be the case consistently, for this to be sustainable throughput, let's say, and just like having the network switching would still have significant impact, particularly during high traffic situations. So it's still pretty damn good.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna try to do our own benchmarks on Firedancer. I'll let you know how those go. But I'm a little bit more optimistic. You may be right that it is not gonna be. It could be like in the tens of percent range, the sort of real world throughput. But the reason I raise this is because I think it's. So I was talking to someone who used to be at Jump and working on these sorts of things, and They I was like, why is Firedancer so much better than the Solana implementation? And their view was basically that even though the Solana sort of original implementation is like okay, it's been made in like a startup setting, and so it's just not optimized. Like it's not as nearly as fast as it could be. And that's somehow very exciting to me because like I know that that's the case on the EVM side, right? Like you could get a lot more throughput. Obviously, like there's a lot of questions around consensus and whatnot, but what I think this kind of shows, if there was a network that was running only Firedancer and could get to, let's say it's 50K, like actual throughput, assuming there's even demand for that amount, I think it sort of like considerably raises the bar of what's possible in my mind.
Yeah.
Because not that many years ago, or arguably even like a year ago, 2 years ago, the general feeling was that like the absolute maximum we're gonna get is like, I don't know, maybe in the thousands. And there wasn't even anything that was like really doing that yet. Now, like there's Ethereum's roadmap, which theoretically takes it to some level of throughput, but does include sharding. But then Firedancer, which I think the most exciting portion of it is like, okay, like if we can get single shard throughput this high, and even Firedancer is probably not optimal because they probably have not made any changes to consensus or any of these like Solana protocol related things that could be changed to be faster. So the possibilities for performance, I think, in the next like 3-4 years are much higher than I thought they would be. I'm now beginning to think that like we not only can definitely get to like mainstream scale, but we can even get to mainstream scale while retaining like reasonable levels of decentralization.
I'd agree. Now, I'm curious about where what the let's say conditions were for this number. Were they because for the
I
Solana
don't know.
main implementation, the 50K were fully parallel transactions? So were this also fully parallel transactions? Because that's actually when Solana has had bottlenecks. It's never been with fully parallel
Yeah.
transactions. It's always been with something hammering a specific account.
Yeah, yeah, and this is I would assume so, but we'll run our own benchmarks on it at some point, and then we'll see. Like that is the issue, and I'm not sure if there's any. So the way to get around that specific issue, in terms of well, not get around it, but to maybe assist in it is some degree of sharding. But if everybody wants to hit the same account, and then then everyone does, and there's not much you can do about it, right? Like you will
Sure,
have processing delays.
but the thing is, even on a if the node is itself more efficient, then even when that happens, you should expect a similar, in theory, scale, right? So that's why I'm curious
Yeah.
on if this was on fully parallel as well to kind of extrapolate from it.
Yeah, and because you get the sort of in the Solana transactions, you get all the kind of dependencies of that transaction, what it's going to hit up front. You should be able to basically parallelize that as well. But I think all of that is just like not yet optimal. I'm just very interested to see over time like what is the optimal Solana implementation and how fast it can be and how cheap. And relating to that, what I was curious to discuss was like I have a feeling that that cannot be actually deployed in Solana. So you can put Firedancer into Solana, but if we look at Ethereum, for example, you have faster nodes. Everyone still runs Geth. The same thing will probably happen in Solana. The hardware requirements might be different. You basically have to enforce it, and then you boot a whole bunch of people who potentially can't join this new network. So I suspect, and this is a pet theory of mine, that eventually Jump Crypto will launch a new network. Maybe do it sort of Kusama style, as if it was like Solana, but running only Firedancer.
Interesting. So wait, back up a bit. Your theory is that even if even if the private answer node is a lot more efficient than the default one, everybody will still default to the default, basically because of inertia.
Because defaults are defaults, right?
I'm not sure. The thing is that there are different economic forces in Ethereum, right? In Ethereum, you're necessarily particularly incentivized to get a more efficient client because there's only so many transactions that you're going to put into a block. And during congestion times, you're going to get higher fees anyway. Whereas in Solana, if we're talking just regular transfers, you get a fixed fee no matter how busy the network is. So
Yeah. Well, priority fees
as a
were introduced, weren't they?
sure, okay, but that's let's just look at the base case, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Base case is me making transfers on Ethereum. Me making transfers during congestion means that I need to pay more. On Solana, it just means that it might be harder to get my transaction. That's it, and I need to retry like in a couple of seconds. The point is that in Solana, if I am packing the stuff into a block, the more transactions that I get to process, then the more of those tiny slivers of soul that I get. So I would think that in Solana, you're more incentivized to actually have something efficient.
Yes, and you might argue that Ethereum has more people running hardware at home and stuff like that who are less likely to put in any degree of effort to do anything
Yeah.
because it's not really a cost for them per se.
Oh,
But
that's
I
another
still
thing.
think I still think it's true. Like some portion of the network will not be running it, and that portion of the network will hold back the rest of the network considerably. I I know that like because of the way that sort of leader election works and whatever, like it theoretically doesn't, but I think in practice it does. Like if it's a very small minority, sure. But what if it's 40%? What if it's 50%?
We'll see. I
Or
think
at least
even at
you get big
50%.
discrepancies in consistency. But whatever the case, like the optimal way would be in terms of pure performance, not thinking about any other vectors, would be to basically like hard fork into pure Firedancer and boot everyone out. And so the other thing I mentioned briefly is that it's quite possible, I haven't checked, but I will also let you know on this later. It's quite possible Firedancer has even like requires more hardware. And so that might be one reason why people don't upgrade is
It,
because
it,
they
it's
need to run
possible,
like more hardware.
but if at the same time, for whatever reason, Firedancer doesn't choose to NVMEs like the default Solana implementation does, then this might mean that your hardware lasts longer. So there might be different trade-offs in there that we need to figure out.
Yeah, but the point is the absolute cost of acquiring the hardware might be higher. But this is speculation, so maybe we don't need to go there. But
And
my but so
and the
I'm very, very interested in like taking this as far as it will go. And I've been
Mhm.
like I'm so just to be clear, I think like Ethereum's roadmap and sort of trying to maximize decentralization is great. I also want to explore maximum performance. I want supercomputer to run everything and just see what we can do in that respect. And like if you look at Solana's hardware requirements, at least on the default node, they're not that high. Like everyone's talking about it as if they're like, you know, you need like deep blue or some shit to like do it. No, you don't. It's like a an expensive gaming PC. Like I'm interested to think about like what would happen if you had like I don't know like the hardware itself you had to get to run a node was like 50K, something like that. Like what could you do with that? And I suspect the answer is a lot.
That's actually something that I wanted to point out. That but are you familiar with the change to stake weighted quality of service?
No.
Okay, so this is one of the things that they did to change to try to deal with network congestion, because one of the causes for network congestion was that during volatile periods, liquidators basically just spam the network with transactions trying to get to the liquidation first, right? And this is relatively cheap to do because you just need an efficient RPC node, which comes with
Yeah,
a
well, it's
high hardware requirement, right?
you mean they spam the network with conflicting transactions trying to get one through. So
Or they just
they
send the
fill
same
up the mempool.
transaction, or they just send the same transaction through 4 different RPC nodes just in case,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? Or 10 different RPC nodes. But the thing with stake-weighted quality of service is that basically the nodes are going to reserve, I think, is 80% of their connections, of their incoming connections, and for nodes with stake. And they're going to distribute basically the transactions that they receive through those connections based on the stake that the nodes have. This means that if you have just an RPC server or just a node that's forwarding transactions without any stake, it's going to have a much lower chance of getting the transaction. So
Interesting. That
so what
is
this
really
means,
interesting.
and
Thank you
and
for
but
telling me.
oh, you didn't know, okay?
No.
But well, one effect of this that I'm sure people have considered is that yeah, the cost of running a Solana node on a hardware wise is high, but chances are that the cost of the stake in order to actually get this node to forward the transactions is going to be much higher.
Interesting. So the Ethereum maximalist hat argument against this would be that it's going to centralize the network even more because there will be a smaller subset of full nodes that are able to process transactions in like a timely manner.
Mm, Not quite. There is going to be a subset of nodes that can forward transactions to be processed. The nodes that were processing the transactions doesn't change because they already have the stake, right? The thing is, right now I can have an RPC node, or before this, I could have an RPC node that holds no stake whatsoever. That all it does is forward transactions. Right?
Yeah. But so like I totally understand the mechanics of it, and I think it 100% makes sense. I think it's very clever. All I'm saying is that there will be nodes which have like basically priority bandwidth, which is a centralizing force for the network, right? So if you have access to that node, or you have enough sol to stake, then you get better service from the network, which makes sense. It's like
Yes.
more skin in the game, thus we do your stuff. But it does mean that there's a smaller subset of like of nodes that get, that privilege,
I
as compared to
again,
not requiring Solana stake, right?
I disagree, because you weren't able, if you don't have stake, if you didn't have stake before, you still weren't able to produce a block anyway. So that doesn't change. However, now if you are an RPC provider, you will need some stake in order to forward transactions. Given that you need some stake, if anything, I think this may have the impact of having had to spread out the stake more, because you need some, even if you are not making your money from producing blocks.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, I'm curious to see how that goes. But it does make sense. Like it's a kind of similar dynamic, I think, to Ethereum's gas, except sort of that cost is not by default rolled over to the user making the transaction. It's basically rolled over to the RPC provider, which I think is an interesting dynamic.
And that's a good way to put it, actually. It is closer to gas in that sense.
Yeah. Anyway, supercomputers in the future, very exciting. One other thing I wanted to discuss relating to Solana before we move on to other things was there's there's two, but one is kind of a segue. So, are you aware of what's going on with Neon, the EVM thing on Solana?
Yeah, generally speaking, I know that. What do you mean? I know that actually their token should be unlocking
When
sometime
can we use it?
now.
Is my question. I don't care about the token.
Well, you should, because the fees need to be paid in the token, and the majority of the token is locked. So basically, nobody's sending transactions through it now.
Why do the fees need to be paid in the token?
Right? Because
Are they going to try to do this like early Ethereum bullshit where every service was like gated with their shitcoin and then ultimately everyone realized that that doesn't work because nobody wants to get a new token to use a thing.
as as far as I know, or at least the last that I've read from them, I've been in touch with the team a couple 3 weeks ago talking about marinade related stuff, but we didn't get into token. But last I read of it, yes, the internal fees are paying. It's basically, think of it as running an Ethereum node only with Neon.
Yeah. The interesting thing about, first of all, I think Neon is going to be very interesting because if Neon can produce considerably better performance than, and at least what they think they can do, and we've done some thinking around how that would be possible technically. Like they should be able to get to considerably better performance than almost any other EVM network right now. By the way, which is not saying that much, just to be clear. EVM networks. Well, I'm starting to sound more like a Solana maximalist. That's not good. I'm not. I'm a performance maximalist in half of my brain, and the other half is a decentralization maximalist. But I want both paths. Anyway,
I could just turn that into they're the same picture meme, right? They're being a Solana Maxi and a performer Maxi.
Yeah, but right now largely the same. But I think it'll change. I think once people realize the kinds of performance that we can get out of these things, there will be a lot of contenders for that throne. Anyway, if they can get anywhere near sort of those kinds of figures in the Neon EVM case for an EVM implementation, and by the way, Neon requires quite a lot of fidgeting or like trickery in order to fit into the Solana programming paradigm. So you need to basically, I think, run the program like locally up front, so you know all the dependencies, and then you need to state those dependencies when you make the actual transaction. And there's all this like stuff. But the interesting thing is that if that's possible, then by default, there is a considerably more optimal EVM network implementation than that, right? Like, if you can smush these two things together and get to good performance, it means that much better performance is possible in an EVM environment. And this is actually something I think there's a company called Monad is sort of working on. They're trying to sort of do a Solana style implementation of an EVM network. It's monad.xyz. Small,
I'm
like,
familiar with them.
yeah, this is seed raised sort of stuff. But that I think will be fascinating because like once performance like that is possible in the EVM, I think people will be very surprised at how much demand there is for that extra performance. There's this sort of like prevailing thinking. I don't know if this is reality or if it's just in my head, but it feels that way, that sort of the EVM world is like, it's pretty much good enough. We'll have slightly more scalable things and roll-ups, it's okay. And there's not that much more demand, and this keeps block space expensive and all this other, stuff. And I think they discount Solana because it's harder to move to Solana. It's not that easy to program in Rust. There's all these reasons why Solana is sort of like easy to ignore.
It's a different model as well. It's not just like
Yeah.
a different programming language.
Yeah, very, very different model. And this is like, and there's not an option where you could just deploy on this EVM network your existing smart contracts and suddenly everything is like Solana style, instantaneously responsive and cheap.
And now you're still running your EVM code, but you get intra-shard parallelism that you couldn't get anywhere else.
Yeah, like and you keep your full composability, if it's a single shard and so on. And there are things in the EVM which are poorly designed for parallelism. So it's not like it's not like an optimally implemented EVM network is an optimal implementation in general, but it's going to be so much better that there's going to be a lot of like if you take any use case. Like the funny thing is like what thrives in Ethereum mainnet? DeFi. What do we know from traditional finance about DeFi's sort of trajectory in terms of cutting costs and lowering fees? Like as close to zero as possible, as fast as possible, and so I think that is going to happen, and it also opens up EVM to having like on-chain order book implementations and things like. But then once you get there, then you're like, maybe there's an even better way.
Yeah, I agree. I'm quite curious on seeing what's going to come out of it. I was a little bit skeptical for a bit there with Neon, particularly earlier last year, because it seemed that they were in no rush to get to mainnet whatsoever. But it's getting there now, so which is good.
Mhm.
So, yay.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think there's going to be like a horde of people necessarily going to Neon. It's more that will open people's eyes to what is possible even with EVM. And by the way, this isn't a criticism of Ethereum's roadmap. I think Ethereum is making the right play for Ethereum, where they're not trying to hit the next stage of innovation. They're trying to leap it because they're going to be so much slower just because of inertia, all the different parties, so much capital, blah blah blah. And they're going for just like, ZK proof everything. We have a chain that just verifies ZK proofs, and and then that's it, right? And I understand that roadmap, But I suspect these intermediate steps are going to happen, and they're going to be quite surprising to a lot of that ecosystem in terms of just like how much adoption they get in that interim period. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm quite curious to see what the most, let's say, pragmatic protocols on Ethereum are going to end up doing, right? The ones that are already looking at multi-chain. Not the, you're going to get the bankless folks that call everything else a scam, right? And fine, fuck them. Let them wait for the next
They don't call
iteration.
everything else a scam, but they're pretty
You're right.
Ethereum centric.
They call everything else a monolithic VC chain. So not a scam. You're right. It's not Bitcoiners. Still, they call absolutely everything else a monolithic VC chain, and Ethereum is the only thing for it. But you do have the more pragmatic teams, Aave and whatnot, who do have an interest on the chains. And it would be interesting to see what happens, for instance, because we have Solent in Solana, which is currently paused. It would be interesting to see what happens there if a non-native protocol shows up on Neon, and how that develops, comparatively speaking. And if I don't know, I'm really curious seeing what's going to happen there.
Well, I think there's an interesting kind of inertia in jumping programming paradigm, simply because all these like big Ethereum protocols have basically sucked up all these Solidity developers, and somebody said this. It's like it's the greatest. What was the wording? It's the greatest retention strategy ever, because if you have all these Solidity developers, there's nowhere else they can go. But they're like a Solidity developer is not automatically very capable of working in another programming paradigm. It's a very specific thing. Like, just if you know Solidity, that does not mean you can easily program in Rust, for example.
Oh, sure.
Let alone any of the other random fucking, smart contract
Move
languages that
or
people have
whatever.
come up with.
And
Yeah,
I hear you, but I hear you, but if you're Aave, for instance, you get to throw money at the problem of figuring out how to run this on Neon, right?
yeah.
And at that point, it is
On
just
Neon, it's
an
easy.
issue. Yeah, that's but, you're gonna have something. There's gonna be the wrapping and the connection with Machen and whatnot. And there's gonna be some stuff that you need to figure out. I'm pretty sure some of which is gonna be plug and play. But if you're Aave, you can afford it. And what I'm curious to see is the impact that this might end up having on the ecosystem as a whole. I'm quite curious on that. And yeah, this is not going to change the number of people actually building on Solana, but it might change things like how much is there on TVL on Solana. It might change the pools that are available if you need to liquidate a large player, right? This is the kind of stuff that I want to see what happens with.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And I mean, everyone is planning EVM implementations. I don't think we've yet seen really, like, the only ones that have captured any sort of significant market share are the sort of alternative EVM chains. But you would expect that to start drifting into, L2s, and L2s are showing promise in that respect. And then these EVM implementations on other chains or other ecosystems. But we'll see. It's gonna be fascinating. I suspect if I suspect it's a transitionary period where you get that better performance with largely the same smart contracts, and then you realize you're like looking over into just over the fence into Rust smart contract land and going, why the fuck are we here? Because it's going to
Yeah,
be more expensive. It's going to be slower. Like, yeah.
we'll see. I mean, software developers don't grow on trees, right? Particularly good ones. So that move I expect is going to encounter a lot more resistance than just like, hey, let's dedicate some people to maintain this thing on Neon for a while. But we'll see.
Well, I would actually argue that from the perspective of the crypto industry, software developers do grow on trees, that tree being the traditional technology industry. There are a lot of people, man. Like, we don't The thing is, we don't need that many people. Like, you read about all these like consensus and Coinbase and whatever, like that's a whole different thing. I'm not going to say too much about that, but this is like that's a different thing. That's like hire a bunch of people from Accenture kind of thing. The kinds of software developers that we need, there are plenty in the world, and a small subset are currently working on blockchain related things.
Okay, I'm going to defer to you on this one because you have had probably more recent experience hiring developers than myself.
There are plenty.
It's just that having seen the amount of shit out there written by people who just figure like, oh, this is like a stored procedure only on a blockchain, and that they have no idea about the mental models required for building crypto stuff is what I
Yeah,
become
but
hesitant.
wait, so really the thing is like you're going for like low level engineers, and those tend to be very fit, like or a good fit, right? Especially if they worked on distributed systems in the traditional world or anything like that. It's not a long path. Anyway, one thing I wanted to discuss briefly is Eigenlayer.
Okay.
I've come to the conclusion that I think like Eigenlayer is this sort of stake or restaking protocol that's in development on the Ethereum network. The idea is that if you've staked Ether like into the proof of stake, you get from staking that Ether in proof of stake, you get a possible slashing liability of 50%. So it's possible if you fuck something up, that 50% of your stake is slashed. What Eigenlayer does is it basically allows you to add slashing, I don't know what the right term is, but like slashing reasons, slashing liabilities on that remaining 50%. And then you can ask the stakers basically, or the validators, to do something else as well. So these are people that are already running hardware. They're already very committed to Ethereum. They have skin in the game, and you can like piggyback off on that skin to get them to do something else. So as an example, and this one makes a lot of sense to me, is like you could, if you wanted to bootstrap a network of sequencers for a layer 2 network, I suspect it would be considerably cheaper for you to incentivize these Eigenlayer stakers to provide that sequencer as a service than it would be for you to bootstrap a new network of sequencers that are incentivized, because they don't need to put any more capital into the system in order to be like sufficiently incentivized to make things work. And in a proxy kind of way, like if you're, for example, a layer 2, it is in the Ethereum stakers best interest for layer 2s to work, and so they're likely to provide those services at kind of like a discount to trying to get completely new ones. um, and I think that will apply on in many areas. You can think about Oracle nodes, various liquidators, things like that, keepers, whatever, wherever somebody needs to run hardware and perform a service. And so firstly, like, what are your thoughts on this? I know we've discussed it very briefly over text, but what do you think about the overall model?
Yeah, we discussed this briefly over text. I think, if I recall correctly, the topic around the time was you were thinking like, hey, what would this look like on Solana or other chains, right? There are a couple things in there. The first one is one of adoption. Um, while I agree with the extra capital efficiency of being able to stake with this for whatever other purpose or the network you have, and I agree that it's likely that it's going to be easier to use this than to bootstrap one. I still think there's that perverse incentive of protocols printing their own money, because if they fail at bootstrapping, hey, we failed. But if we don't, then we printed our money, and the sky's the limit. So I do think that protocols have so far been conditioned to think in the terms of print your own money, and then you would do the staking and slashing with the money you printed. So that's one thing. Second step,
But
I'm
you
trying
can
to think.
but you can do that. So in Eigenlayer, you would have slashing on, like, you can add additional stake. I think that'll just largely be unnecessary. You would have slashing on the ether that they're staking, and then you would have the upside in your own token. And then after this, and like everyone else, you would subsidize the upside with inflation
Mhm.
until you get to some kind of scale, and then probably you would use your own token as the fee token in your network, which would then be used to, like, you would transition the incentive for the validators or sequencers to be fee based at some point versus subsidy based or
Okay.
inflation based.
Yeah, I guess that's possible. Now, refresh my memory for how staking is happening in Ethereum, because from what I recall, you are basically seeding your when I stake with a node, I'm ceding control of the ether to the node. If the node were to go offline, I can necessarily withdraw until the node is back online, right? I'm basically fully ceding
I'm
control
not.
of the ether,
I don't think you're ceding control of it in that way, but I'm not sure. I would need to check.
because it would seem that at the very least in Solana, you don't. If a node were to go offline, you still get to get what you get is a stake account, and the node itself, the validator cannot do anything with that stake account. It's just like they are trusting me with this much stake.
So
So
in Ethereum, as far as I know, there is no like stake delegation officially yet, which is potentially why it could be like that. I'm not sure if it is, but
okay, so
the,
then it sounds
so
like
the assumption on like Ethereum mainnet protocol level is that you have a stake and you are running a node,
yes.
not that you're just some random guy who's delegated to a node. I'm sure delegation will come at some point, but right now delegation is basically handled by things like Lido and Rocket Pool, and
Mhm. And so
so
it does sound
that is
like
problematic.
then you are giving the stake to the node, which is why then they can get to see these extra conditions on top of slashing.
I think right now, but there was plans basically to allow a smart contract to stake. I'm not sure if those are live yet, which would allow you to basically build in recovery on that level.
Are they not live yet? I mean, that was one of the things that Rocket Pool needed like 3 years ago.
It might be. It could be live. I'm not sure.
Hmm.
But at least in the early days, people were just cutting corners because it was taking a while.
But
Yeah, I
but
mean,
whatever the case,
whatever the case, like I think the interesting thing about it is that something like Eigenlayer, so basically it allows you to use the main network security to do other things to some degree. And so not hugely different to what, for example, Cosmos's mesh security idea. And if it works the way I describe, wherein it is actually cheaper and easier, like there's basically just this marketplace of validators to you can get to. I think that UX wise is so much better when you're trying to launch something. That I think it'll become a thing, and then I think every network will implement something similar.
that's the thing. I see this working on a scenario where you're kind of ceding control of the stake to the node, because then you can have this network of validators offering different a la carte things that you stake to, that you restake up to. But for instance, in Solana's case, where a validator cannot do absolutely anything with the stake that I give him other than hold it, other than use it as part of their backing, then it seems like this is something that would need to be implemented at the system level, not as a not as an extra protocol on top.
So it becomes incompatible with liquid staking and certain kinds of stake delegation, or at least protocol level stake delegation. But what you can do is you can pull it on a smart contract level before it ever goes into, like, you can do delegation outside of protocol level delegation and implement it on that level.
Sure. That and this is what I was getting into when we were briefly discussing this, which I think that this is going to be something that actually works better when it's closer to liquid staking, where you give a smart contract, your soul in Solana. you get a derivative back, and then this derivative is what you end up staking and what gets slashed, because that way the smart contract is the one holding the stake account, and then the smart contract can
Yeah.
do whatever the hell it wants with your soul. So I think that's basically how this needs to happen. I think it needs to happen closer to and in Solana at least, it would need to happen closer to a liquid staking implementation. I've read in Cosmos
You
2.0 that
can
this
use
is
the liquid staking token. So yeah, I see what you're saying. There's like two ways to go about it. One is sort of like at the liquid staking point where you can't have both, because this makes validators have different risk profiles, and so the liquid token, the liquid staking token they provide, or the derivative as you said, is no longer sort of one to one. Each one of those is they have varying risk profiles under them. Or you can do it via like that liquid staking token, which you then sort of allocate into something else, like that has slashing conditions, but that works
Yep.
just fine in many ways. I don't think there's any problem there.
Well, sure. What I'm saying is that I think that's how it's at the level at which it needs to happen.
Yeah.
I don't, again, since given the validator can't touch your stake, then the validator could also not slash your stake if you bet on the wrong thing. So it needs to
I
happen on the next level.
Yeah, but you're thinking about it from the perspective of an individual who's not a validator, who's delegating, and whether they could get extra revenue. I'm not sure that's how restaking is going to work, because you need the validator to run something, or like somebody needs to run something, and there's not really any reason to delegate to those nodes for that extra like
Why wouldn't there be? It could be the difference between 8% APY and 12% APY.
because like the important thing is how much stake the validator itself has, and that's the thing that you're sort of the what how much stake the validator itself has and what hardware they're running and their capabilities to run other hardware. That's what you're kind of buying as a network or an Oracle system or something else. You don't really care about all this extra stuff that people are putting in there. It makes no difference. Like that validator can have, a ton at stake via delegations, but that additional delegated money doesn't necessarily increase the reliability of the additional services it provides. If that makes sense. Maybe it does create a higher incentive or something like that. I don't know, but I need to think about that some more. That's a good point, though.
Yeah, I'm going to run the models in my head a little bit longer.
Yeah. Again, we don't prep. Okay. Yeah. Well, this one thing, I don't know if you want to discuss this, but I had this I've had this in my mind, which is sort of the shares to MAV that are being considered right now. The two primary ones, as far as I can tell, are the Flashbots Suave design, which is sort of like an SGX based hidden mempool, like nobody knows what's in it, kinda. And then there's a marketplace for MEV. And then the other approach is sort of like using threshold signatures to do like commit and reveal, ideally on a block level, which has some downsides, like has some upsides in terms of like that it's probably a lot more performant than SGX. SGX is quite slow, which is my big concern. Like there's a lot of overhead. But then using threshold encryption, you need to basically rework a lot of smart contracts on the network, because they like you don't know what's in a block until it's in a block.
Yeah.
And so you can like it doesn't require large changes necessarily, but for example, if you have two transactions that are both encrypted in the block and they turn out to be conflicting, you need to be able to deal with that. So it requires changes on either the protocol level or the smart contracts, depending on various things.
A lot of the MEV stuff that I've been looking into, as for obvious reasons, being on the Solana side. So I've read what the Flashbots team posted on Suave, which was, first of all, it's so weird for me pronouncing it as Suave, because it's like I'm swallowing the E. The Spanish would just say Suave. But anyway, I read what they published, and the fact that they're making this modular as well seems interesting. I'm curious on what your take is on that, because a lot of the stuff that I hear about modularity, or at least on the Solana side, it seems to be, as we say, only from the teeth out. Basically, like, oh, our our MEV client is open source, so everybody can use it. Like, yeah, sure, but the thing that actually builds the transaction bundles and sends them out, that thing is a black box over there. So this modularity really isn't helping any. So if you have had a deeper look at Suave, I'm curious in if it's that type of modularity, or if it is actually modular and we're likely to get.
Well, there's not a lot of stuff in it. I think right now it's mainly just a vision.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there's like one line like SGX based mempool. And it's like, okay.
Awesome. Cool.
And so there are benefits to that approach. Like, so just maybe paint the picture. Right now, I think it seems like there's a general trajectory towards having either a small number or maybe just one network that does most of the block building for all other networks. The reason being, it allows you to aggregate V, so you can capture cross-chain MEV, and in general, then everyone can basically like use the same marketplace. Like it's sort of this MEV liquidity is better if it's aggregated. In reality, I suspect it's going to be more than one, but like let's say it's not going to be like a ton of networks that do block building because that defeats the purpose. And the SGX approach, so again, my concerns are primarily around scalability and speed, because you do add a lot of overhead to computation and cost. So like the mempool needs to be quite fast is kind of my issue. And so like, can you keep up with the progress of networks improving in speed while intentionally taking a significant amount of overhead? I don't know. But it makes sense from the perspective of like what we want basically an environment where blocks are built, V is sold. The majority of that MEV is basically returned to the users because it's auctioned off. So you kind of minimize the MEV miner like portion of it, and you want all of this to happen in an environment where no single entity has control, so they could be basically front running everyone else's MEV or just getting all of it for themselves. And that's the current situation with Flashbots, right? So everything that's going through Flashbots, theoretically Flashbots could just be like, this looks like a good opportunity, and
Yeah.
and we're not going to put your transactions here. We'll just slide in our own, which is why, like, I think they're going in the right direction, right? Like, this is how it needs to work to some degree. The problem is having this sort of system that is both hidden and trustless is difficult. And right now, we really only like, and it's not just like hidden, like, you know, it's not like you can use a ZK proof very easily, because like I do something, I know what it is, right? Like, and then I prove it. It's not like that. It's like the whole thing needs to be hidden from everyone, including the person running the hardware. And so SGX is kind of the only thing we have to doing something like that. And so it makes sense. I suspect it's going to need. So well, there keep being new issues found with SGX is problem number one. Problem number two is that while you don't need to trust the party running the hardware, you do need to trust the party manufacturing the hardware. I think that's broadly acceptable. That's kind of always the case. It's, like if you go down that path, we're very quickly in like you can't use technology at all. But there's
And
that, and then there's this
also,
performance stuff that I'm not sure about. So I think on the performance side, and this is, I don't know if I have this right modeled in my head, but my feeling is that the issue comes from not being able to parallelize very much. So you can you can maybe parallelize by block, but a block needs to always needs to be built by a single machine to avoid conflicts.
I haven't really looked deeply enough into that. For a moment there, I thought that, oh, there's something for which we may want to pull in Alex. Then I realized, like, yeah, it's going to be 2 hours of him ranting about other things.
We can never have Alex on. Alex, if you're watching, I'm sorry. I love you.
Hey, man, we just edited it down to like 5 minutes. It's not like live broadcast. We will need to block about 5 hours for the recording, but
Well, what would be interesting maybe is, well, one option. So we do some work with SGX, and some people at Equilibrium have a fairly good understanding of the different constraints they're in. We could talk to them, but most interesting would be to talk to the Flashbots guys, honestly.
yeah.
I don't know how much they're going to be able to say about it though, because the public stuff is very vague, and I think there's a reason for that. The other option, this threshold encryption stuff, is the nice thing about it is that it's a lot more straightforward. It's less about creating hidden mempools, and more about just giving users the ability to make transactions which can't be front run. And that can be turned on by default. But then you do end up in this situation where block building always becomes a two-step process, wherein you need to define the ordering and then sort of reveal the transactions. This can be done relatively efficiently. There's a team working on this called Shutter, and what they told me, which made sense, is basically like all you need is for the validator to sign the transaction ordering and propagate it, and then you can like reveal the thing. And the way that they're designing it, and all of these are being designed, is like basically it's a separate network that holds a sharded key, basically, and you send it, like it encrypts your transaction, and then you send the encrypted version to the network, and so on.
See, that one I find more interesting because it also seems to be something, an approach that is more portable. The issue I had reading about
Yeah.
Suave, the issue I had reading about Suave was that I was thinking, again, I may have spent a lot of time on Solana then, but reading this, I was like, yeah, this is not going to work on Solana at all. Because I'm not sure if you're familiar with Solana's Gulfstream thing, but it's not at all like Ethereum's mempool. So this, I think, something based on thresholds and encryption would likely be something that you can use on both. And so I'm quite curious to see what comes out of that one.
It should. So conceptually, I think Suave should work everywhere. I think it comes down to performance. And I'm not talking about a specific design for Suave, but like conceptually it should. But you're right that threshold encryption would be easier in many ways to implement. I think the Shutter team is currently working with Gnosis chain or something to do it there. And I mean,
That's an Ordino that we asked to come on board.
we could talk to someone from the Shutter team. That could be fun. It's what I like about it is that it's a very practical thing. Like, we have everything we need today, and scaling it is not like scientific breakthroughs. It's more like networking stuff. Like, there's probably some overhead from building the key within this external network, but again, that's message passing is what's happening, and that is like a networking thing. But there's definitely overhead. So like it's not like a purely unencrypted block can be built faster than doing something else to it that involves encryption by any kind of external party or network.
Sure.
But I think it's interesting. And the other thing that's interesting about it is that, and this also was from the Shutter team, is that you as a user can kind of like ensure that you are not front run, but someone else can still back run you, which is basically like, if you move a DEX market enough, like when that is revealed, the validator can still arbit. And that has no implication for your trade, Like you got exactly the price that you wanted, but there is still MEV to be captured. And they define that as like good MEV. And yeah, that makes sense, I think.
I'll look into it a little bit more.
Yeah, they're in Germany, these guys. It's from like the BrainBot Technologies they were working on payment channels, Raiden for Ethereum.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I
That
forgot
stuff.
about Raid.
It turns out Raiden still exists. I did not know.
No kidding. Are they doing better than Lightning?
I don't know. I would assume not. I I mean that I don't know. I put all that shit into the specific TVL numbers don't matter because they're all so small.
I mean, honestly, I'd even forgotten that Raid existed.
Yeah. I have one other serious topic, but I think I'll leave that to the end. Maybe we should discuss Ryan Suckers being booted off Twitter. Have you heard anything
Uh,
about that since being?
Actually, why was that? I have no idea why he got booted. And if I recall correctly, his last tweet was something like, I fucking love crypto, which doesn't really seem like bootable. So,
Yeah, I don't know, but it is weird, isn't it? Oh,
yeah.
he's back. Is he back?
No, I think so. I saw him tweeting, I think.
Okay. Why was he suspended? Anyway, he's like the last guy in crypto that needs to be suspended. I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes he does wage a holy war against the establishment on Twitter, but you know,
Which that is hardly misaligned with Twitter's current regime anyway. So I really don't get why he got booted.
yeah, I don't know. Did you read the Messari crypto theses of
No, I haven't
2023?
gotten to it yet. I mean, that's why I ask you, hey, is anything worth me prioritizing for? And you weren't too excited. So
Yeah, at the risk of sounding a little bit obnoxious, and to be clear, I've read the Messari report pretty much every year that has come out. It's very like, if I was a VC, it would be very interesting. Maybe that. But
that's fair.
there is a thing that I think is like, it's not just that they've gone higher level in their reporting. It's also that there's simply so much going on that they have to, and they as in Messari are incapable of going super deep into everything. And then maybe the other thing is that they're not really positioned towards technologists in general, which is why VC institutional reader, I think this is very good. Like they do a very good job of taking a few concepts that are relatively recent and kind of breaking them down quite accurately.
Well, look, we were actually we were speaking well of Messari's thesis, I think, an episode, right?
I don't think they're wrong.
And for what it's worth, this is not even like a team. I still think this is just Ryan producing the thesis by and large every
Yeah.
day. So that's a mammoth effort considering this thing is like 200 pages.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. It's one of the best kind of approachable long things that you can read to try to get an understanding of what's going on. Like it's still deep enough where like a complete, outsider will struggle to understand what's going on. But if you're sort of following something, you'll probably get something out of it. It's just, I think, for me personally, I kind of live in the world of the technologies that are being built right now that are not necessarily out yet, and quite far in that world. So these are all always things like I read it and then I'm like, well, yeah, but wasn't that clear a year ago? Like,
Well, the main reason why I want to go over it, I just haven't prioritized it, is because I've been extremely focused on Solana and what's going on there in the last year something. And a lot of the one of the reasons why this calls are very useful for me is because they they force me to keep an open eye on what's going elsewhere. And I hope that the Messari doc can help that. Right? Maybe there's something there that I'm not aware is going on or something.
Yeah.
I just haven't made a priority of it. I had too much other stuff to go over.
Yeah, and there's the other thing that Ryan, obviously, like if you follow him on Twitter, this is clear. A lot of regulation stuff. And while that can be interesting, at least because they're US based, their focus is largely US. And so that's sort of tangentially relevant, but not super relevant for anyone in Europe. He does
Mine,
broach some subjects relating to Mika and the EU regulations as well.
it might not be immediately relevant, but I do expect again that if, and we've discussed this before, I do expect that if something far reaching comes out of the US, other countries are going to end up imitating it. So it's not,
I
in that sense, it's not a bad idea to keep up with coming attractions.
I'm not so sure, man. I would actually argue that Europe currently leads.
Hmm.
Mika is the clearest and most far reaching regulation that isn't like kill it please pretty much anywhere in the world. The US still has the issue of the SEC just telling everyone they should follow the rules without defining them. It's a very unclear situation from a regulatory perspective. In the US there's of course always a little bit more leeway in things. You can get away a little bit more with like let's make it big enough and then pay a settlement kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
10% of what we made as a fine.
Yeah, but I think in terms of regulatory positioning on sort of that nation state slash continent level, I would say EU is positioned very well for the next 10 years, given that there is now, even though it's not set in stone yet, I think the final draft of Mika, it's like markets and crypto assets regulation or something like that, was circulated some weeks ago, maybe months ago. And when I say final, these are always loose terms, but it does pave the way to do a lot of things in the EU that largely have gone offshore until
Hmm.
now. And the regulators across the EU are implementing those Mika regulations in practice today, now that they know they're not going to be like their local regulations are probably not going to be hugely in conflict with future EU regulations. And so I'm quite excited about that. And this brings me to another topic, which is that I think the next 10 years, maybe 5 years, but like within 10 years at some point, we're going to get a huge amount of real world assets on chain. And I think a significant portion of those are going to come out of the EU.
Well, I think that is an extremely optimistic take that we can probably stop on before I go full Ricardo on it.
I don't know. Like, so let me paint the picture. So there's two things. I think that will happen, and I think it also needs to happen. So we can take the needs to happen portion of it. So we're not speculating on regulatory things. The needs to happen. So what I've been talking about recently with people, and I sort of came up with a framework for myself to think about it, is that basically everything we've done in crypto, we've built everything we can that doesn't require any regulatory anything. So like partly because countries have been unwilling to let people build stuff because it's all been very unclear, and partly because people haven't wanted the headache. Whatever the case, we've built like this entire financial system that currently is moving around basically magic beans and changing them into other kinds of magic beans. And that's great. There's like it exists, it works, like it's going to get faster, it's going to get cheaper, there's going to be more services available, but the next step clearly is real world assets, right? So that financial system works today, if we can get assets on there. And a very sort of clear example that I have in my head is like is IPOs. So let's imagine you want to instead of IPOing on Nasdaq or one of these things, you were able to just basically tokenize your stock and put it on chain. You would immediately, assuming the regulatory sort of stuff works, whether that's seed pools and dexes and lending protocols, or whether it's just somehow structured that you can do stuff with it. I don't know, but you can immediately get access to all these different services. So as an example, you don't need a market maker. You can just put it in a DEX like an AMM, and there you go. Your stock has liquidity. Amazing. Don't need to do anything like that you need to do in the traditional worlds, basically, for that. It can immediately be used as collateral in lending, which I would argue that real world assets are exactly what lending protocols need in order to become truly useful. Because as long as the collateral you're using is a magic bean and what you're getting out is a magic bean, like it just, you know, like what makes Maker or Aave or Compound like truly useful is like if you have a stock portfolio and you can basically like use that as collateral to get loans denominated in your local currency. That's interesting. And so I think that absolutely needs to happen. And now Circle has started talking about it, BlackRock has started talking about it. It's gonna happen. It's just a matter of which regulatory regime will allow it to happen first.
I absolutely agree with it needs to happen. We all will see about the will happen and what time. But I absolutely agree about what needs to happen. You know, I keep thinking, keep going back to you remember Materium? Vinay Foot,
Yeah, it's still going.
yeah,
It's
I
still
know.
going.
And I was recently reminded. Well, I know, like I keep more in touch with one of his co-founders than Vinay, but I was recently reminded of them because they partner with this kind of like NFT trading pool protocol thing that I was in touch with. And I keep thinking that Ethereum is going to end up being one of those 10-year overnight successes. Anyway, now where suddenly the regulatory regimes align and like, yep, we have this perfectly built legal framework for doing all this thing on chain, and nobody else has gone through that legwork. So I do agree that it needs to happen. We will see about the when.
Yeah. Yes, like I 100% agree that Ethereum is doing kind of the right things. I suspect like with many projects who are a bit early in their sphere, they end up getting, or they already are kind of bogged down with design patterns and regulatory possibilities that did not exist a few years ago but do exist now. I think that is a real issue in things like that. So for example, like I don't know what would be like trying there were a lot of attempts to build things that look like Ethereum dApps or Solana dApps before those networks existed. And they failed for the simple reason that it was the wrong to build your own chain to do that, right? And sort of a similar thing exists here. And the other thing is like stable coins, like one reason that maker like stablecoin or algorithmic stablecoin things became a thing was because there was a general sort of assumption that you couldn't really do them. Granted, Tether had done them, but Tether is Tether. And there was a feeling they'll probably disappear at some point and we need an alternative. And that's actually no longer true. And the same thing in terms of MiCA regulation, which I think Ethereum is in the UK, so not under MiCA. Big issue, which totally not their fault, but another thing like MiCA states has very clear definitions of stable coins, asset backed tokens, etc. And so perfect legal framework in the UK, maybe no one cares.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that aspect. That basically they do have a, well, for lack of a better word, they do have a lot of legacy legal code, and they are currently running on a platform that, for whatever reason, decided to do a hard fork. So
You mean Ethereum?
no, I mean the UK.
Oh, that kind of platform.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Yeah, it is illegal. Basically, the key thing on Ethereum is not the code; it's the legal framework, and that's
Exactly.
the legal platform that runs in decided to do a hard
Yeah.
fork from the use.
Exactly. And that is a big problem.
They're running on they're running on Europe Classic.
They're running on good old fashioned colonialism form again.
And they're running on the Windsor sub.
I think that is the optimal place to end. Thanks, everyone.
This has been fun. Take care, man.